The DarkFi blockchain is now up and running. You can test smart contracts on it already, specifically DAO tooling, money transactions, and swapping between currencies. Those contracts are deployed. You can test them using a little command line tool. And we also have a block explorer.
Welcome to the Allo Capital podcast. We are summoning Allo Capital, a new spinout from Gitcoin that's designed to build the capital allocation layer of the tokenized internet. There's big upside here. Capital allocation is a multi-trillion-dollar design space. VCs, governments, NGOs, and DAOs all have to allocate capital to survive and thrive. But it's also a place where we can start small. Every time you spend money, you are allocating capital. We're threading a through line partnering with builders, researchers, and funders to figure out what on-chain capital allocation looks like and building it on-chain. If you want to learn more, visit our website at allo.capital, where you can download the Allo books for free, play with some of our dApps, join the Telegram, or participate in the Proto DAO. My guest today is Rachel Rose O'Leary. She is a DarkFi core developer and writer. She authored Lunarpunk and the Dark Side of the Cycle, a text which helped create a Web3 privacy revival. She's the lead author of the philosophy journal Algorithm in the 21st Century. Very excited to have her on the podcast. Rachel Rose and I have been in a dialogue over several years about creating a collaboration between public goods builders, regen builders, capital allocation builders on my side, and more privacy-aware coordination technology on her side. So I did an episode several years ago with her entitled Lunarpunk, which went deep into the why behind the philosophy of privacy. And in this episode, we talk about DarkFi, which is a new DAO that is designed to be privacy aware. And I think that it kind of tickles my brain a little bit to be taking the latest advancements in privacy tech and thinking about how do we allocate capital with them. On this show, we talk a lot about tokenization and AI driving the next layer of the coordination stack and capital allocation stack of the next internet. But there's a lot of interesting privacy tech that has been built in and around the Ethereum, Zcash, and DarkFi ecosystems. And the idea of private DAOs is just a whole new branch of coordination software that I find really interesting. So, in this episode, we talk very technically about DarkFi. If you're a developer who is interested in learning about more privacy-aware tech, the DarkFi DAO, which you can access at dark.fi, is a great place to get started. And I think this episode serves as a foundational resource in building privacy-aware capital allocation tech. So I think you're going to enjoy this episode. Hey, Rose, how's it going?
Hi, good. How are you?
Pretty good. Excited to catch up on Lunarpunk and DarkFi and lots of cypherpunk technology that you've been working on. So maybe we'll tee off with what's DarkFi?
Perfect. So thanks so much for having me on. So DarkFi is, it's kind of two things. So on the one hand, it's an L1, which is, built for what we call anonymous engineering. So what that means is we provide tools to developers to build any kind of anonymous application. Practically speaking, we have a general purpose smart contract infrastructure that allows devs to make use of ZK through a VM and assembly language that we've built, and then compose smart contracts that use ZK logic inside of them. So that's the anonymous engineering aspect, and it's generic and general, so it supports, any applications that developers want to build. But DarkFi is not just a kind of permissionless, programmable, anonymous chain, although that's one half of what DarkFi is. But it's also a set of applications and native contracts that come basically built in to the DarkFi stack. So what we have in terms of apps currently working is we have a chat app called Dark IRC, or just at the moment the DarkFi app, which is peer-to-peer chat, strongly anonymous, can be run with all sorts of well primarily now it's Tor, that you can use for metadata anonymity, but we plan to support NIM in the future as well. it has no concept of identity. So you can change your nick as much as you want. You can appear as whoever you want. So it has a very weak notion of Sybil resistance, or has no notion of identity of any kind. Then it has encrypted DMs, encrypted groups. And this is the basis of our own communication. We use this for coordinate around DarkFi Dev. And we also have a number of apps that use the blockchain. So we have like OTC swaps between any two parties. We have transactions like send and receive money. We have an anonymous DAO, which I'm happy to talk about in more detail, kind of what that means later on. And we also have anonymous file storage app that's a work in progress at the moment. So we have all these apps. And the reason why we built it in this way, where on the one hand, we're like a general purpose programmable L1, but on the other hand, we're also kind of a toolkit with many different kinds of apps, is because we see that this new development paradigm of what we call anonymous engineering is very early stage, and the kind of concepts that are involved when you're building an anonymous app, and they're not strongly developed yet. So in order to build like a kind of smart contract infrastructure and developer experience that is like tuned for like the ZK anonymous context, we felt we had to like build apps in order to see what that like this new paradigm should actually practically look like. And then as well as that developer experience aspect, so after Ethereum, there was a conventional wisdom that developed where essentially if you were trying to do an L1, the wisdom was like, look at what Ethereum did and where it succeeded, and basically try to replicate that. So one of the things that a lot of L1s were trying to replicate was exactly this thing of, creating permissionless general purpose infra and allowing people to just build whatever they want, and really focusing on attracting developers with this like general toolkit. DarkFi felt that, in this new context of anonymous engineering, we basically had to, rather than putting the kind of the permissionless tooling at the center of our vision, instead we thought, we actually want to show developers where we plan DarkFi to go. Like, what is the vision in terms of apps on DarkFi, and like actually demonstrate to our users that vision and to kind of take them along with us. So it's different to a lot of conventional L1s in that way, because we actually have this like native set of apps, and we have like this DarkFi app, which I mentioned. So right now it's just a chat app, but in the future it will be sort of like a peer-to-peer anonymous Telegram that is like, works very well on mobile and desktop. But the idea is like, it's a Telegram type interface, but you can use smart contracts on it. So you could like operate a DAO from inside your chat app type. That's kind of the vision of where we're going.
So most of my time in the Ethereum ecosystem, and so every time I pop my head outside and hear about different paradigms, I find it quite interesting. And I'm wondering if you can tell us next about the why behind the what. I know that we did an episode about 2 years ago in which we talked about Lunarpunk and Cypherpunk and why they matter to you, but could we just briefly touch on the why behind the what, why privacy matters so much to you and the other members of the DarkFi project?
For sure. So for me, it's very much about having agency over the future, or like retaining the ability to make new futures happen. And so I think what's really scary about surveillance in general is like the possibility of it creating a world where there's no freedom of speech. And as a result, like even people's own thoughts are kind of restricted by this, the presence of this like totalitarian surveillance state. So I'm worried that the like surveillance in general, the impact it has on freedom of speech, and then as a consequence of that, on the ability to act in different ways. So like, and specifically this kind of freedom of action, which is like freedom to define new futures. So I kind of see like surveillance in general as a bit like the cancellation of the future. Because if all of the information is kind of aggregated and there's some kind of it's available to whatever surveillance state or various parties that they can see everything and control everything and like stop everything before it happens. I feel like that equates to a kind of control or domination over the future and a reduction of the horizons of like where humanity could go. So for me, and this is also where, DarkFi, in terms of its apps, we're thinking a lot about community, and that's why the center of our application is actually a chat. And so it's about equipping communities with like financial and coordination tooling. And the reason, or one of the reasons for that, or like the reason I see for that, is that it's about enabling those people to essentially like carve out new futures or like new ways of being or new destinies for themselves or for others, like with the cover of privacy and encryption. If that makes sense.
Yeah. So I think you've been one of the primary people who's pilled me on privacy. I also think Zuko Wilcox from Zcash has sort of there's this meme coming out of Zcash that says privacy is normal. And I think they're trying to normalize privacy. That's kind of living rent free in my brain. And I know that the Ethereum Foundation and Vitalik have been making a turn towards privacy, really trying to focus on what they call DeFi Punk, which is DeFi applications which build privacy into the technology. And so I feel like I've been pilled over the last couple of years on privacy and privacy being normal and privacy being an intelligent default. And I think that you've been sort of one of the leaders for that. I remember when Lunarpunk first came out, and you were an author of it wasn't a Lunarpunk manifesto, but one of the seminal pieces on Lunarpunk. And it feels like there's an increasing number of regens and solarpunk people that are recognizing the need for privacy, and I give you a lot of credit for that movement. You and Zuko and Vitalik, I think, are the three privacy luminaries in my network.
Amazing. Happy to hear.
Yeah. I want to talk about DarkFi more. So
yeah,
what's the next release? I think you guys have a release coming up.
Yeah. Okay. So first, I will just say that, so we had a very important release in May this year, which was the DarkFi proof of work testnet. So the DarkFi blockchain is now up and running, and you can test like smart contracts on it already, specifically DAO tooling, money transactions, and swapping between currencies. So that's all available. Those contracts are deployed. You can test them using a little command line tool. We also have a block explorer. So that's all there. But now we're basically preparing for getting all the pieces together for like the final release, or like the second final release, basically going from like an alpha release to a beta release and approaching mainnet. So, in terms of like what's the remaining work, there's a few major areas and a lot of small things, but generally speaking, we need to finalize like the block rewards. So currently there's like some economic simulations going on where we're looking at like, given like these different like price forecasts, like what is the profitability of mining DarkFi, and from that trying to derive like a security budget for DarkFi, and to see like how well would it adapt, or how well would it survive in these like low price conditions, or basically testing the block reward curve against these like financial like tests.
Remind me what mining DarkFi means. Does that mean running a node?
Yeah. So DarkFi it's proof of work. It uses random X, which is the same consensus algorithm as Monero. So it's a CPU optimized algorithm. It's kind of anti-ASIC in that if you wanted to build an ASIC for RandomX, you would end up building a CPU because it's very much like a CPU optimized algorithm. It uses a lot of memory, which is why it's called RandomX, because it's using a lot of randomness. So DarkFi uses that. It also does merge mining with Monero. So that's one of the things we're also working on now that didn't make it into the last release, but that we're going to release is the Monero merge mining. So there's that. Then on top of those, we're working on a big upgrade. So I mentioned we have the chat app, which is like the core of our like product suite. It's really good because like basically we built the chat back in, I think it was 2021. We started out using Matrix for our like dev communication. But we had a lot of people joining, and because we had encryption enabled on the channel, like it was just very slow and laggy. I don't know if you've ever used encrypted Matrix channels. Maybe they've improved it now, but it was very buggy, and it actually started to interfere with our work because like we would have like a 1 second delay between messages. It was like really frustrating if you're trying to talk with people async. And so anyway, we ended up just building our own chat app, which, ended up being a really good way to test the DarkFi peer-to-peer stack because we're constantly using DarkFi peer-to-peer every day to send messages. And we also had to create this like other kind of layer as well, which is an event graph, which is basically a DAG, directed acyclic graph, for messages that like are stored between nodes. And this allows us to basically retrieve like messages up to at the moment it's a rolling 24-hour message retrieval, but in this upgrade we're working on, you're going to be able to configure it. So like on your DarkFi app, you will say, I want messages up to 12 hours or 72 hours. And, there'll be nodes providing this like longer term data. So we have that working. And also we had the testnet running, so we're fixing a lot of bugs, and we fixed a lot of bugs that came up as a result of that. And a few other things as well, but we've done some preliminary work for bridging by adding basically state proofs to the block structure, and which can commit to DarkFi at a certain state. So that will be useful for bridging, but we're not that aside from that, we haven't done much on the bridging side, so that's kind of a big to do. But basically, and there's a few other things I won't mention because they're it gets a bit too granular. But like these are the main areas of work, and we're putting these together into the next release. That will be let's say like the second final release, and then we will launch the mainnet. So it's taking time, but we're trying to do it properly.
Could you play us forward towards what the actual what is the final vision of DarkFi? In 10 years, if you're maximally successful, what does that look like?
Yeah, we want to be like a huge phenomena, like at least like big. So like imagine like potentially all the people who are now on Telegram would now be instead using DarkFi. So that would be the best. And then also, as well as they're having the normal chat, they also have access to markets and, buying and selling and transacting, and DAOs. So the DAOs are something, we before we started this conversation, we mentioned a bit about capital allocation. So I think if the DAOs are brought to that level of like familiarity that people have that they have with Telegram now. So if you had like a real genuine adoption of DarkFi, and also of DAOs, I think that could go in really interesting directions. So, we spoke about Lunarpunk briefly a few minutes ago. For me, like in Lunarpunk, the goal was to kind of to reorientate the conversation back towards more cypherpunk values, but also just to somehow reform cypherpunk with some of these things that the solarpunk community had been emphasizing. For me, that was always about like regeneration and ideas around life and like the kind of natural richness of something like a forest. So in the Lunarpunk essay and in subsequent texts that I've written, I often compare anonymity to a forest, because it offers similar kinds of protection to communities as what like the natural foliage of trees would provide. It's also a nice metaphor because similar to a forest, anonymity provides a level of kind of multiplicity that I find really exciting. So this is where, coming back to DAOs, this is kind of like my long-term hope for DarkFi is that it kind of leads to this creation of what we call a dark forest, which is a kind of like highly productive, multiplicative space of experimentation and people raising funds to create new kinds of futures and acting like genuinely kind of putting those futures into practice in a way that is completely uncensorable. Maybe this is something different to the DarkFi absolute bull case of Telegram level like adoption of everyone using this app. But yeah, something along the lines of like politically motivated communities using DarkFi to create like uncensorable, like unstoppable experiments in human organization, and that's where I think that would be amazing to see.
It feels like if you're successful, there'll be a groundswell of money for people who are building privacy applications and then replacing Telegram, not private, or at least like not ideal from an OPSEC perspective messaging platform, and then also not private blockchains. Are there any other sort of application categories that y'all hope to swallow up in the fullest dark of time?
Sure, like Amazon, for example. Yeah. Other kinds of apps that are only possible with privacy that don't exist yet. I think, this is maybe like a bit. Maybe this kind of thinking is too grounded in like current present day, like crypto. But I do think there's a lot of applications that could be built just around like finance that like don't exist now, because like a lot of game theory actually depends on anonymity or privacy, private financial. So like stuff like auctions would work way better if the bids are encrypted. And there's many examples of these kinds of. So like another very useful application that I don't think there exists right now is like just having a way to like offload large amounts of capital. It doesn't have to be a DEX, but just like dark pools. Dark pools are another like very useful financial primitive that don't really exist right now in crypto. So there's a lot of these low hanging fruits. But given that we're kind of focused on this basic suite of like, okay, like our focus application wise is very much two pillars: communication, coordination, and finance. So on the communication side, like we built this chat app, which I've mentioned. We also have anonymous tasks, encrypted task management system. So these are things that we've just built because we need them as a project. But as we're kind of building them for ourselves, we also expect that others like will adopt these tools because they need them the same way we do. Just basic organization tools. So like task management. In the future, we want to make like peer-to-peer accounting software. So that even like you could have like a credit network where you can be like in a fully anonymous peer-to-peer way, like minting currency to others, like making a loan to your friends, or this is like a very primitive, like basic tool. I don't know if you've ever used Ledger command line tool, but it's amazing. I really recommend it. It's just a very simple like text-based accounting software. But like I use it for like all wherever I need accounting. And it's just like double entry bookkeeping software, text-based, super simple. But basically we want to take something like this in terms of how it works, but then make it peer-to-peer and encrypted. So you can share that with your friends. You can have like a shared like accountancy thing. And that would then also allow you to actually create money through loans, which is like, then you're at the level of like actually recreating banks, but like locally with your friends or like with your comrades, like peer-to-peer. So that's the kind of community coordination tooling side. And then the other side is like this like financial tooling. So it's this idea of like empowering those communities to like to have full autonomy over like all possible realms of activity, including the financial. So like sending money is like the basic thing. The DAO, like maybe we could talk about what the DAO is and how that works, because
I'm also curious to know like what it's like to work with someone who is completely anonymous to you and that you've never met before. That seems interesting to me, but in broader strokes, we could get into the DAO and how that's structured.
DarkFi is mixed. Like, there are plenty of people on the team that I do know and I have met in person and that we work together in person and so forth. There are also many people who I don't know who are fully anonymous, and we actually facilitate that. So like we made it so we're using Codeberg rather than GitHub. That's because it's very easy to create an account over Tor. So we kind of actively encourage new developers to create anonymous identities, to join our chat and like use Tor. And, we actually have a guide. We have several guides on our docs, specifically for developers who like want to help us, but like, are scared of the kind of backlash that they might face through working on something like DarkFi. So we facilitate those kinds of people. And it's amazing how the dynamics of like having a fully anonymous chat changes the dynamics, because it's like, weirdly, okay, so we're still a small community, like we're, I don't know how many people, there's like a lot of new people all the time and different people. It's hard to know how many people are on our chat. But it's small enough that you can actually recognize the person that you're talking with most of the time, even if they're using a different nick. So this is also a de-anonymization vector, like, because people use the same turns of phrases, they have the same style of communication, and that can allow you to identify them even if they're using different nicks. And so you develop these kinds of friendships, even though you don't know who the person, the IRL person is, but you have a friendship with this online representation of this person that uses different nicks. You can kind of draw lines between them, but the nicks, this issue of de-anonymization via like communication style, that's actually solvable. Like, and actually an interesting use case for AI. So someone already built a plugin for for one of the DarkFi our clients, WeChat, where basically it will use AI to like apply like a tone to your voice. So you can put in like surfer dude, and then you like everything you type will then go through the AI, and you'll say things like a surfer dude. So that makes it really hard to know who you're talking to. And the only way to really know is to confirm via DM. So like DarkFi supports private pub key DMs where you exchange your public key with someone and they're able to message you. You have to do a key exchange and then you can message. And so you can verify identities using this, using the DMs, which is what we tend to do. And also, if you have a private chat with like a group, then you can basically, you know that the only people in that group are people that you've actually invited to that group. So that allows you to verify someone's identity as well. You're like, you kind of move between these public private groups and you get a sense of like what's going on, who people are, and you build trust and friendships even in these anonymous environments. So I just think human coordination can adapt, and it's interesting the new dynamics that come up. But yeah, let's talk about the DAO. So I don't know if I talked about the DAO when we had the podcast on Green Pill a couple years back, but the DAO is our most complex application that we've built. So there's kind of many ZK contracts involved. When you create a DAO, you set like various parameters. So they include, you definitely know all this stuff because it's like, this is like basic. A lot of it comes from studying like Open Zeppelin, like the module, governor module. So it's like you choose stuff like, okay, what is the quorum for a proposal to pass? And also like, what is the limit, the proposer limit? And that allows people to, like, they must have a certain amount of tokens in order to make your proposal. So basically, you come up with these parameters. There's 3 parameters I just named. There might be more since the upgrade that we did, but they're like, I think with those, we can already kind of figure out what happens with this DAO. In DarkFi, one of the ways that we get like programmable ZK is through this concept of like what we call a bulla. So a bulla is a term that comes from ancient Mesopotamia. And basically they have these like, they also call them, I think, tokens, but they're basically clay pots where inside them they store like a number of different financial instruments. So they were creating complex financial instruments in ancient Mesopotamia, and they would have like inside this, in this like clay pot, they would have like futures on like an option and like some other assets just kind of mixed in, and then you could trade these bullas, which were these like this kind of portfolio of like financial positions essentially. So DarkFi uses this idea of a bulla because it's like a kind of shielded, extendable object, which can have like many different things kind of contained. So the bulla for us is like an encrypted commitment to like a series of attributes. So when we create a DAO, we're actually creating this like DAO bulla, which is an encrypted commitment to the series of attributes, which include the variables that I just mentioned. So like the, proposal limit, quorum, like approver limit, and also stuff like, okay, the governance token ID, like the treasury token ID, if different to the governance token, and you specify all of these things. And then you create this encrypted hash, which is bulla of this object, this DAO, and you deploy it on the blockchain. And so using ZK, we're able to use this on-chain encrypted hash and make proofs about it, like prove that we are, within these parameters of the DAO without actually revealing, any of the things that in question. So, for example, the next stage after you've like minted your DAO is to create a proposal. So the proposal is very basic at the moment. It's like the minimal viable DAO. But I'm curious if you agree with that statement, because you know much more about DAOs than I do. But the basic kind of action of the proposal, what a proposal is that, do you, yes or no, agree to send money of this amount and this token ID to this person specified in the proposal? So that's basically all it does right now on DarkFi. It's just like, it's a decision to send money from the DAO treasury to a specified address. And then that's it. So like, really what this is useful for, it's not good for like, something like Polkadot, where they have like upgradability. So like, as far as I know, they have decentralized governance over like what upgrades go onto the chain and stuff. So it's not good for anything like that. But specifically what it's good for is like, if you are a programmer and you have a proposed update to DarkFi, you could make a proposal and say like, this is the work that I want to do, like, please send me money to this address, and people will vote yes or no. So it's very good for that. And it can also be used for any activity where, there's money to be sent. And so basically what happens then is that whoever holds the DAO governance token is able to vote then on this proposal. And after the voting period is over, basically it goes through this kind of this other ZK contract, which is basically exec, it's called. There are levels of like information access inside this DAO. The basic level, like say you just own you just hold the token of the DAO.
Mm-hmm.
You can't see anything about what's going on with this DAO. Like, you don't know, if you just own the token, you don't know what's in the treasury, who's in the DAO. Like, you don't know like what the DAO has done in the past. And so you really don't know what's going on with this DAO. The same if you're a random person and you don't own any token, you also have no idea what's going on with this DAO. But there is another level of access. So if you hold the DAO private key, that doesn't give you the ability to spend from the DAO, because to spend from the DAO requires one of these proposal processes to go through. It doesn't give you the ability to spend, but it does give you the ability to see the treasury. And so that's something where basically you could imagine different kinds of DAOs would deal with that differently. And so if you're like a dev DAO, or say you're a company, you might say, we're going to keep the treasury information private to like this small group of people that owns the private key. But if you're like, some kind of radically open DAO that wants to have all of your community involved, then you might actually share that key with them. And it doesn't mean that they can spend or anything. It just means they can see the treasury. And okay, so then voting process goes through this like this exec phase, which basically means run this proposal and the votes through the ZK machinery that will check like whether it whether it meets the conditions set by the DAO. So that's the basic gist. I will say that like there was a fairly good update to the DAO like this year that I might be missing some parameters, but that's the rough basic kind of how DarkFi DAO works. And I'm really excited by the potential of this. I think it'd be very, very useful to all sorts of people and communities. I myself have like first-hand experience in like, we did the Assange DAO. It was kind of horrific. We really feel that having had an anonymous DAO at that point like would have helped a lot. But also for DarkFi, it's like another tool that like we desperately need, because we plan in the future, we're very kind of conscious of the fact that DarkFi might be targeted, and we need to have some kind of a decentralized way to distribute funding, and also that protects people's privacy because of this high stakes scenario that DarkFi finds itself in.
So for listeners who are familiar with DAOs, there's been sort of an evolution of DAOs, and a lot of it has been built off of previous work. But it feels like DarkFi is sort of like an evolution of compound style DAOs, of which Gitcoin was a compound style DAO in 2021. So I'm familiar with some of that stuff, but it feels like it's been evolved in a more privacy aware direction. And so you have these levels of access to information that are enabled by ZK and encryption technology, which I find kind of interesting. And that creates opportunities to create areas of context and common information that aren't available to everyone, which sometimes it's nice when you're just debating something with nuance, not to have to show it to everyone. And then is the basis of the DAO, is it an EVM compatible smart contract, but with some ZK stuff built in, or is there a completely different virtual machine that's more privacy first?
Yeah, so actually, there's no EVM compatibility in anything in any DarkFi stuff.
Okay.
So yeah, it's we don't use an EVM. We actually use WASM as the runtime, but the ZK stuff is separate. And so we're kind of opinionated about this thing that like, okay, so DarkFi is like, we use the AGPL license. So it's like a very strict form of free software where it says basically, if you're gonna use this code or reuse this code or even build applications on using this code, they also have to be licensed AGPL, which is, basically free software license. So it's what they call a viral free software license because it contaminates the kind of downstream of the source code.
Alec recently came out in favor of these very copy left licenses. I can't remember if he said AGPL or not, but I think it's in the same family, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think I remember this. It was one of the GPLs I think he was talking about as well. So AGPL is great, and so we use that as the license. Then we're also very we have a very simplicity-oriented design philosophy. So if any of your listeners have heard of Suckless software, it's like a Linux desktop utility kind of software project, which builds all the desktop utilities, tiling windows, and various tools, but it's all using C. And, everything is very succinct and very simple. And like usually with a desktop manager on Linux, you use a config file to set the kind of styling and stuff. But with Suckless software, you actually modify the C code directly and you compile the C code. So it's like very fast, it's very minimal, it's very simple, everything's very self-contained. And so it's called Suckless because it's software that sucks less. They have a software manifesto that's very influential on DarkFi, also because my co-founder co-founded Suckless. So DarkFi is like very much of this kind of culture of like simplicity-oriented design philosophy, which is related to Unix in that it's about, keeping things separation of concerns. But there's also a certain kind of minimalism where it's about a conscious effort to reduce complexity wherever possible, a kind of like ongoing war against the forces of complexity, which are the sort of like the defaults, like entropy of code. Code is like always tending toward complexity. So you have to have this like constant war against it to kind of keep it in check. Part of that is ruthlessly minimizing dependencies. So DarkFi does have dependencies, but only when like strictly necessary. So we've actually ended up building a lot of stuff ourselves. Like people always, a lot of the time people will be like, what? Like, oh, why did you build a P2P network? Like, why didn't you just use libp2p? But, oftentimes the projects which say these kinds of critiques are themselves like struggling with their with their open P2P implementation, or like, struggling to make it work, or mired in complexity, huge bloated teams, working in many different directions. So we've built a lot of stuff ourselves, including the blockchain, including the peer-to-peer network, including the smart contract infrastructure. So I mentioned we use WASM. Then for the ZK side, we have a custom like ZK VM and assembly language. So on DarkFi, if you're trying to write like an anonymous contract, like say you want to implement something like a dark pool, then you have to use this ZK assembly language, which is very low level. So in a lot of these ZKL1s, like something like Aztec, they have a language like Noir, and Noir it tries to look and feel like Rust, and so basically it's like, Rust developers, it kind of seduces them to thinking that they're building something with Rust, but in fact they're making ZK contracts. DarkFi is very different because when it comes to our actual assembly language, this ZK assembly language, it's extremely close to the actual metal of ZK itself. So you actually have to kind of really think about the anonymous schema, like the ZK schema that you're building. So you can see examples of this on our documentation. But basically, there are like patterns. When you're building an anonymous app and you're working with ZK, there are like a fixed number of techniques that you end up reusing again and again. A really, really good example of an anonymous schema, which we use this basic technique like a lot in DarkFi and in the anonymous apps, is actually the Zcash sapling payment scheme. And so I really recommend studying that because it's a very elegant protocol. And I think if you can get your head around this, it really opens up the possibilities of what it means to build in an anonymous context. So the sapling payment scheme involves, like, essentially there's like a sequence of steps. We have it well documented in the DarkFi docs. So you make a commitment to a series of attributes, a bulla, as we call in DarkFi. But inside this, these number of attributes, which can be any number of attributes. This is where it gets really interesting from a programming perspective, because you can make commitments, you could do smart contract calls, it's extendable and programmable. It's very interesting and exciting. So you have this encrypted hash, and in there you put something called a nullifier. And basically this is double spend protection. So you create a coin. This is Zcash, but DarkFi also uses the same technique. We kind of take it apart and we make it into smart contracts, whereas Zcash, it's not smart contract based. And so you make your commitment, your coin, and in there you have like your token ID, the amount that you're spending, and this nullifier, which is a random secret value, and you put that on chain. And then later, I'm skipping a bunch of steps because I just want to get through this quickly. You reveal that nullifier. So you haven't actually revealed the coin itself, the token ID, the amount, or any of the data inside the coin. You just reveal the nullifier. And with that nullifier kind of burned, we call it the burn step, you can no longer spend that coin. That's the double spend protection. So it's like, these are the basics of anonymous engineering, ZK engineering, where you're doing these kinds of tricks to avoid revealing like the important data that you want to keep secret. You reveal auxiliary data that might like enable you to prove things, such as like this coin was already spent. So there are many techniques like that. There's other kinds of commitments, but in DarkFi, we use very simple, close to the metal language to program this ZK aspect. Then we have the higher up version, the higher up layer, which is the WASM, where we actually do the smart contract engineering. On the kind of smart contract level, that's when we're doing our like more high level stuff, like we're like composing transactions, and like actually implementing like the blockchain logic of like how the smart contract works. So, and like using the runtime. So that aspect is actually done in Rust. But the Rust smart contracts in DarkFi, which are using WASM, which do the blockchain interactions and the validation and everything that goes into the transactions, they use the ZK. So basically, the ZK exports a binary that is then used in the DarkFi smart contracts. So it's a bit confusing because we there's like a number of things that can be called contracts, but there's basically it's the Rust smart contracts, DarkFi, and then this lower level ZK contracts that get imported into there, and all of the checks get enforced. So that's like a really rough run through of the DarkFi smart contract infrastructure. We've kept everything very simple, very straightforward, very low level as much as possible, especially when it comes to the ZK. There are a few reasons for that. One is that we don't want to overcommit to a specific design when it's like our application suite is like early stage. So it's like first we wanted to build apps, see what are these patterns, what are these techniques that we use in anonymous engineering, like this commit reveal process, like other kinds of techniques, Pedersen commitments, we use them a lot. We wanted to kind of flesh those out before we build a abstraction on top of that. But also we want to keep like any further abstraction, we want to keep it as kind of simple as possible. And I'll just say as well, because I forgot to mention, that those smart contracts that are written in Rust that make use of the ZK, they have a crypto SDK that allows them to use like different kinds of anonymous engineering techniques. And ultimately, we want to extend this SDK so it's not just the ZK layer, and like we also have now signature verification and other kinds of techniques available to developers. But we also in the future, we want to enable multi-party computation, fully homomorphic encryption. So basically all of the innovations in encryption, like anonymous engineering technologies, we want to like draw them into the SDK and like make it as featureful as possible. But right now we've got the ZK aspect working, we've got signature verification, we've got 95% of what we need Pedersen commitments, and in order to build 95% of the application layer. So we're going to run with that, and we're going to keep iterating on DarkFi itself.
Well, I certainly feel nerd sniped by all the cool technology that y'all are building. I haven't kept up with Rust or any of these advanced privacy primitives, but this gives me a launching off point to jump into. Given that we're running out of time, I'm wondering if you can give me a link that any developers who are out there working on capital allocation, have been privacy pilled by this episode, can come check out.
Yeah, totally. So I'm glad we had quite a technical conversation, because we must have done 10 minutes max on DarkFi, on Lunarpunk, and on, privacy,
Yep.
the why and so on, which is great because I'm always getting negative feedback, people telling me, oh, I'm not technical enough, I should talk more about the DarkFi tech. So I'm really glad we got to talk some tech today, and I hope I did an okay job and it was clear. And I didn't mess anything up. But yeah, so in terms of where developers can find info, the source of truth is always going to be the Codeberg itself. So codeberg.org/darkrenaissance/darkfi is the link to the source code. And if that link is too hard to remember, you can also just go to dark.fi, and you have all the links there organized. So you can find the source code. You can also find the documentation. I hope our documentation is quite good. I think it's quite good. If people have issues, tell us and join our chat. It's very easy. You don't have to be a developer. You can compile your own node, or you can just run the app. It works on Windows, Mac, Android. It doesn't work on iPhone yet, but that's because it's like there's this whole thing with Apple signing certificates in. But we're going to make it happen on iPhone as well. So, install the app, join our chat and, you know, make yourself known. And I hope this episode was useful for people.
Yeah, since we went super technical, I'll also just briefly show that you and I did an episode 2 years ago on Lunarpunk, and we got into a lot of the philosophy and the beautiful vision of building more sovereign and privacy-aware future in that one. So that link will be in the show notes as well. What's that you've got on screen there? For the audio listeners, Rachel Rose is showing 2 books up on screen.
Yeah, so if you can see those, they're philosophy books. So I'm also the editor of this journal, which is publishing philosophy. So, you know, I'm always happy to talk about that as well. In this one, we've got, if I can quickly get to the table of contents. Oh, I don't know if you guys can see that, but we have, where is it? Is it? I don't know if it's in focus, to be honest, but
I can see the guest essay that I did, Transcending the Individual Collectivist Divide. So thank you for
exactly
to show your audience.
We've also got this one, which is me there. Explain the Dark Forest or I will fucking kill you, which is a fun read if you want to go like kind of deeper into what is the Dark Forest and so on. So yeah, thanks so much for having me on.
I think this is a great bridge building episode. I think that you and I like live in different cultural circles, but I really want privacy-aware people to be thinking about public goods and regen stuff. And I want regen public goods people to be thinking about privacy, because I think there's a lot of beautiful coordination tech that can be built there. So thank you for being a bridge builder. Thank you for doing the episode. And everyone who's listening, check out the links in the show notes to learn more about DarkFi. We just heard from Rachel Rose O'Leary. I'm excited about privacy tech because privacy is normal. We need privacy to have a functioning democracy. Thanks for listening to the Allo Capital podcast. Again, we are building the capital allocation layer of the post-tokenization, post-AI, post-zero knowledge internet. This podcast episode is for informative purposes only and is not financial advice. Do not make any financial decisions based off of these episodes. In addition, I own crypto assets like ETH DAI, USDC, and GTC. Thanks for listening. See you on the next one. Goodbye.